Okay, so I am going to get us started. So I'm just going to introduce our online speakers. Okay. And we have them sort of waiting in the wings. All right. So, so just to remind you, this is going to look like the first case study looked like. So there's going to be 4 talks. Okay. And then we'll do that combined Q&A at the end. So I will be monitoring the online Q&A. So for those who are in the virtual audience, please drop your questions in that Q&A. And a reminder to the speakers that we'll do this virtually, but we're going to be timekeeping, and we'll give you the 5-minute, the 2-minute, and the wrap-up notification. And just for intros, so Eric Anderson is going to be our first speaker. He's a construction project manager for Palm Beach County, the Department of Environmental Resources Management. So again, he's joining us virtually, and he's going to tell you about the strategies that the department is using for restoration in their area that are also providing resilience benefits. We're going to have Debbie Love, who is the director of the Development Services Department for the City of North Miami. So I think this project is going to look a little different than some of the other projects in terms of setting, which is interesting. She's joining us virtually and is going to describe her and others' work on the Good Neighbor Stormwater Park. It's a really intriguing project, and it represents some variety to those settings. Haley Cox is going to join us. She's the Coastal Resilience Program Coordinator for Florida Sea Grant. So recall that we were talking about Sea Grant agents. She's going to talk a little bit about the living shorelines that have been really important strategies in Cedar Key. We do want to, of course, acknowledge that that's a community that has been very impacted by this hurricane season. But I think she's also going to be able to give some perspective on how they think about these strategies, sort of in the overall sort of resilience sort of framework for the city. And then lastly, we have 2 people speaking together, co-presenters. One is going to be Chris Keller, who's here in person, and he's going to be co-presenting with Rick Hutton, who is in Gainesville. Chris Keller is the resident and senior environmental engineer for Wetland Solutions, Inc. Rick Hutton is a supervisor engineering for Gainesville Regional Utilities. And they're going to be talking about an interesting project called Sweetwater Wetlands. So the interesting thing, too, about this case study is it's one that is really geared very specifically on water quality, which again, in the space of resilience, I think Chad made a great case for the fact that we're thinking, yes, about diverting water, but we also have to be thinking about our water quality. It's also one that I think, I have firsthand experience with the co-benefits. It's an incredible community space. It's a place where I've seen whistling ducks, wood storks, purple gallinules. So that's a really great project in terms of just being able to really think about those co-benefits. So Chris, I'm actually probably going to have you, when you're ready, maybe queue up at the table. Eric, can you unmute yourself? Are you...
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. So I'm going to go ahead and sit down, and I'm going to turn things over to you. We're so happy to have you.
Okay, well, thank you for having me. I'm sorry that I can't be there in person today to present, but let me pull up my screen here. Can you see the Restoring Resiliency in Lake Worth Lagoon screen? All right. So thank you again for having me. Today, I'm going to speak on how Palm Beach County is restoring resiliency in Lake Worth Lagoon through habitat creation and restoration. This picture is a little near and dear to me. It's one of the first projects that I was able to work on in Palm Beach County. We started this project around 2007. The picture on your left is the morning of the volunteer planting event in 2011. So as Jenna talked about, these projects do take lots of time. Some have community support, some do not. Some have permitting challenges, some need funding, some, so there's all sorts of challenges, but the great thing is the sun, always rises and there's always a new day. This was taken by John Marshall, who most of you may know is a was a champion for Everglades restoration. And the picture on the right just shows you how an environmental restoration project can survive in an urban environment and provide just amazing qualities. And this is actually one of our most heavily used natural areas as a result, probably because of the downtown and how many people, but you can see a little bit of green in the downtown area. This is right next to the boat shows, and you know, it can coexist. So really, why Palm Beach County is in the restoration business? Honestly, it was always our goal of just creating habitat and improving habitat for everyone that utilizes our waters, whether you have fins, feathers, feet, whether you're a creature on the bottom of the food chain or the top of the food chain. Clean water really benefits all of us. And as we know, these coastal ecosystems have tremendous amount of pressure, and we're losing them on a yearly basis. So it's really just been our goal to create habitat. Today, Carrie asked me to speak a little bit about Snook Islands. This really wasn't the beginning for Palm Beach County and a restoration story, but it really has provided us the blueprint for the past 20 years of what we learned at Snook Islands. And I'm going to take some of those lessons that we've learned at Snook and share, and hopefully you guys can envision some of these types of projects in your area. One story that I really want to just start with, and I wish I had more time to talk about, but is the Lake Worth Lagoon American oyster catcher. Their story really began in 2005 upon the completion of Snook Islands. The contractor said, "We see these birds with these big yellow or orange beaks hanging around. We're not sure what's happening." They were attempting to nest the very first year Snook Islands was completed. The project wasn't designed for coastal bird habitat, but these birds showed us that we provided them habitat with the food, shallow habitat, and their story continues through this day. We have 4 of these birds, nesting pairs of these birds, nesting on Lake Worth Lagoon restoration projects. And as I said, they're continuing through this day. We have an ongoing restoration project. We got about 20 American oyster catchers all hanging out on newly created sand. The project hasn't even completed yet. 13 of those were banded. While most of them were banded in Lake Worth Lagoon, there was 2 birds, one banded from Martin County and another one banded from Brevard County. Just shows you how restoration is so important for all of us. Not only did they have American oyster catchers, but we had black skimmers. There was about 20 to 19 black skimmers. We had 4 of them had bands, one from an undetermined location in Florida, 2 from North Carolina that were just banded this past summer, and 1 Royal Tern from Virginia banded in 2019. So we're all connected by water, we're all connected by habitat, and it's just so important that we create this habitat. The rest of this presentation, I really want to give you an overview and history of Palm Beach County, why we've been so successful in restoration, and just talk about some of the environmental conditions of Lake Worth Lagoon and Palm Beach County that has supported this large-scale restoration efforts. Go into detail about Snook Islands, how it's been a blueprint, and then quickly just run through some additional projects of what we've done in our area, and hopefully you guys could implement in your area also. So if you don't know, Palm Beach County is over on the East Coast. It is the largest county in Florida. In the 2023 census, we had 1.5 million people living in this area, the 4th most populated county in the state. Our industry is agricultural. You can see to the west, area Belle Glade. We have a huge agricultural industry. Sweet corn and sugar are one of the primary focuses of that industry. As you move to the east, real estate, construction, and tourism is really our main dollars. And then you factor in Everglades and wetlands that are buffering between the agricultural and the urban area. Lake Worth Lagoon is all the way on the East Coast. It's about 20 miles long. It goes from North Palm Beach to Boynton Beach. The average width is about a half mile. The depths vary too, anywhere from 2 feet shallow to 20 plus deep as a result of dredge holes. We have 2 inlets, one to the north, Lake Worth Inlet, and then one to the south, Boynton. the North Inlet Lake Worth is really our primary focus of where we get most of our oceanic water to create the estuarine system. We do have Lake Okeechobee in our northwest corner. Lake Okeechobee, while we do not get a lot of Lake Okeechobee water in Palm Beach County, that is mostly goes north to St. Lucie and west to the Coosahatchee Junior area. We do have a huge watershed, over 477 square miles. As you know, what we do really good in Florida is we move water and drain water. And so while we don't get a lot of Lake Okeechobee water, our own watershed produces quite enough water or more water than we even need. And if you compare that to other estuaries like Chesapeake Bay, it only has a 14-to-1, Indian River Lagoon 5-to-1, Biscayne Bay has 11-to-1, Lake Worth Lagoon has a 42-to-1 ratio. So our own watershed is creating some of our own challenges. We do not have a national estuary program in Lake Worth Lagoon. Lake Worth Lagoon was not a historical estuary. It was originally a freshwater lake. The Indians called it hypoluxo, water all around. It really wasn't until Henry Flagler came into this area and brought the population, brought his trains, brought people to this area in the 1900s, early 1900s, when the first inlets were dug to create our estuarine system. It really wasn't until the 1990s, which is only 30 years ago, that the first developmental plans, management plans to protect Lake Worth Lagoon were really in place. So, you know, this restoration business is relatively new in protecting our waterways. We've had over 100 years of influences, just like most areas in Florida, you know, whether it's marinas, seawalls being put up, stormwater discharges, freshwater discharges. Along comes muck and sedimentation, which is one of the lagoon's primary challenges. As you can see, that's been happening for almost 100 years now. Picture on your left, 1940s, C-51 discharging sediment into the lagoon. In the 50s, the land started to change. We developed our shoreline, put condos, put a seawall in. In 2003, we did a survey and found over 400 acres of mud just in the central part of the lagoon. So our goal has been to try to find a way to cap these muds, create habitat, and to improve habitat. You know, just one example, you know, all the sediment that comes with the discharges on your right here. This is one location where we did a restoration project and capping that mud. Not every location has muck that's exposed at low tide. A lot of it's in those deep dredge holes. Our area has about 70% that is hardened shoreline. That only leaves 30% natural. So we do have a lot of areas to work. We have a series of tools that we utilize. Down on the bottom, we have a Lake Worth Lagoon initiative that helps get funding, brings partners together, has meetings like you guys are hosting today. In the early 2000s, we did a sediment trap project where we dredged sediment from the C-51 before it got into the lagoon. And while Lake Worth Lagoon has been taken off the SERP Everglades, water storage is always helpful for everybody, whether it's Lake Worth Lagoon or in the West Coast or in the northern estuaries. Today, I'm going to primarily focus on the restoration tools that we did to create habitat, create living shorelines, and restore islands. Series of tools that we've developed is putting rock in front of seawalls, scraping down islands, artificial reef program, creating breakwaters and oyster habitat. And what I'm going to focus on primarily is building islands. I always like to start with this slide because you do need to find out your past before you move forward. And so Palm Beach County really past in history started in the 1990s with Munyon Island. We actually reached out to Miami-Dade County. They were doing a lot of these island restoration works. Gary Milano at the time was our inspiration and helped us, you know, get into this business. But it wasn't until we partnered with the Army Corps of Engineers and the state of Florida to construct Munyon Island to create wetlands, removing spoil from this area. This area used to be in the 40s a location for the rich and elite to come and drink the pawpaw elixir, which was considered the fountain of youth. While we found some empty bottles, we never drank it. Monument Island is our fountain of youth, and realized restoration is an important area for us. Taking those tools, we've done a series of other islands: Munyon, Johns Island, Fullerton, most recently Sawfish, kind of utilizing those same tools, scraping down islands and creating habitat. Upon completion of Munyon Island, we partnered with the Army Corps of Engineers again to develop Peanut Island not only as a state, as a county park, but also as a dredge material management site. The Florida Inland Navigation District and the Army Corps was looking at a place to store additional material. However, they needed to take off the material from Peanut Island, about 1.2 million cubic yards. At the time, there was talks of taking that material offshore and putting it in the borrow sites and not utilizing for habitat. Luckily, managers at ERM and within the county convinced the Army Corps of Engineers to look at estuarine restoration, which was as a result of Snook Islands. So Peanut Island in the 1990s, 2000s was an island full of exotics, mostly Brazilian pepper and Australian pines. That material had to be scraped down to get to the clean sand source to develop this island. Finding a location to take this material, we identified Snook Island, identified the Lake Worth Golf Course, and which now is called Snook Islands. It was an eroding seawall and a deep dredge hole over to 20 feet deep with 10 to 15 feet of mud in some areas. The project brought in 1.2 million cubic yards of sand to fill in those muds, cap that mud, and create a true nature-based solution for this shoreline. Rock was implemented to create breakwaters, to reduce wave energy, and to protect the mangroves. So the tools that we learned from Snook Islands are really a lot of the tools that we've been able to take. And while Snook Islands was almost a 100-acre restoration site, a lot of the lessons learned of breakwaters, of making these mangrove islands, was what we learned here is what we've been able to take on and build the rest of our restoration projects. One interesting thing about Snook Islands is when we originally constructed, we constructed a lot of areas with open spaces. As you can see now, those open spaces have closed in and mangroves have grown up. So we do have to do some management activities to keep those open spaces open by removing mangroves and vegetation coming in to allow visitors to actually see these, to see what we've created. So top left-hand corner, you can see the failing seawall, bring in sand, plant Spartina, couple of years of Spartina, and now a lot of that Spartina has been outcompeted by mangroves. In 2014, we partnered with Florida Inland Navigation District and the state of Florida's DOT to construct mitigation for seagrass mitigation for building bridges. And this was the second phase of Snook Islands, building smaller mangrove islands and oyster reefs. This was the first project while we were bringing sand that our second pair of American oyster catchers nested on the sand during construction. And so it made us start thinking, it can't just be about oysters. It can't just be about mangroves. We need to consider the birds. The third phase of Snook Islands included receiving materials of opportunity, beneficial reuse from local marine projects, dredging projects. And we created 2 nesting bird mounds and a mangrove island, an area in between. This was our third pair of birds nesting in Lake Worth Lagoon as a result of this. We were hoping that the 2 mounds would allow 2 different pairs to nest. Unfortunately, they've taken, these birds are solitary nesters and they've taken up the whole island. Ibis Isles is a location where, remember, the girl was in the mud earlier. This was shallow water mucky habitat that we wanted to cap, and we did cap to create mangrove and Spartina and oyster habitat. South Cove in 2012, filling in a deep dredge hole. Grassy flats, utilizing the same technology that we used at Ibis, we used a sand shooter, which broadcasted sand over shallow water mucky conditions to create about 12 acres of seagrass habitat and 2 acres of mangrove. And this was our first project that was specifically designed for American oyster catchers to nest. Most recently, we just completed Tarpon Cove in downtown West Palm Beach. This project was acquired over 400,000 cubic yards of material. Of that, 369,000 of it was beneficial reuse and no cost to the county. Not only did American oyster catchers nest on this island during construction, we also had 3 years of black skimmers nesting and 2 years of least terns nesting. I know we're getting close to time here, so I'm just going to run through a couple of the last projects. Our most recent project is bonefish. I showed you earlier with all those birds utilizing, similar to Snook Islands and similar to Tarpon, filling in a deep dredge hole to create intertidal habitat. One lesson that I do want to share, though, is some of these dredge projects do require lots of material. And material could be the challenging for these projects. You need to have a sand source, and the county's done that either through partnering with Florida Inland Navigation District, local marinas. If you could find shallow water locations that do not have resources, those are also bang for your buck. So some of the tools that we've used in the toolbox is breakwaters, and I know Thomas and Jenna both talked about these. We have those at Peanut Island. John's Island rock has been great for oyster habitat for us. Breakwaters in front of existing mangroves that have heavy wave energy, Jupiter Ridge and Boynton Beach. John's Island is one of the reasons why we've had such a successful American oyster catchers utilizing it. The rock that we've put out there has created amazing oyster habitat. Highland Beach and Old Bridge Park, again, just breakwaters in front of existing areas. Our shoreline planters, putting rock in front of a seawall. Par 3 golf course has not had to have a seawall replaced in 20 years as a result of just adding mangroves and rock. We've dabbled with, over the years, we've dabbled with concrete to concrete culverts at Lantana. We've dabbled with artistic prefab structures at Bryant Park. And then just our more typical rock riprap. And we all of our projects we plant with Spartina and mangroves. You can see the Spartina lasts for the first couple years, and then eventually the mangroves will outcompete the Spartina and to create a green-gray living shoreline. So I believe that's all the time I have. I do appreciate you guys listening today. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me through email, or I'll be around later also to answer any questions.
Okay, okay, I got that. So thanks again, Eric. So everyone saw that there's that slide with his contact information, but again, remember that you can check out the program and contact information is available there. So Debbie Love is our next presenter. Debbie, do you mind unmuting yourself and letting us know if you can hear us okay?
I can hear you fine. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Fabulous.
And do you have, yes, oh, perfect, we've got you. Okay, so I'm gonna let you take it away. You have the ability to share your screen, and we look forward to hearing about the Good Neighbor Stormwater Park.
Of course, let me find the share part of this thing here.
Should be an option at the bottom.
There we go, right there in front of me. Perfect. All right, so just bear with me a second and I'll pull up that screen.
Yep, so this is the brave new world of pulling everybody in virtually.
Right on, right
All
on.
right, perfect. We've got you and we can see your slides.
Perfect, perfect. Well, again, thank you so much for inviting me. Really, really do appreciate it. Thank you for the opportunity to allow me to share a little bit about the Stormwater Park, our Good Neighbor Stormwater Park. Again, my name is Debbie Love. I'm the Director of Development Services for the City of North Miami. Let me tell you a little bit about me and what I've done over time to kind of set the stage for my passion for this particular project. For over 30 years, I've worked as a consultant for communities throughout Florida, helping them deal with coastal conservation issues, water protection, and really that whole careful dance of balancing development and carrying capacity of threatened and endangered species and habitats, and threading that whole needle's eye when working toward rural land stewardship as well. So working down in the Keys for many years gave me a flavor of all of the ABC agencies that we have to deal with in the environmental world. U.S. Fish and Wildlife, Army Corps of Engineer, DEP, etc. And I really believe it gave me a really unique perspective on dealing with merging that whole piece of the public realm needs with economic development and environmental protection to create some win-wins. In order to stay on top of the challenges regarding development in a county with both AE and VE zones, with a few X zones, I became certified as a hazard mitigation planner with FEMA in the early 2000s. And I began the Florida Floodplain Managers Association and was certified as a floodplain manager. This was back in the day when my number was 411. So, that's been quite a few years. But I really believed and still do that stormwater could serve as a real community amenity and not just that whole typical retention ponds that we all normally think of. So times definitely has changed. And as the city planner for the city, I really had a lot of fun creating our resilience program, Resilient NOMI. I still wear a lot of hats, including updating our comp plan and LDRs, just finished redoing our impact fee structure. So I do oversee a lot of different things now, building, zoning, planning, and sustainability divisions. And so bring a lot of that knowledge, that background to our public works folks to help them understand that linkage, that it's not just pipes, that there's a reason you do what you do and why you do it. So before I tell you about the Good Neighbor Park, it doesn't want to change for me. Let me see here what is going on here for a moment. Sorry about that. It's giving me a little bit of grief with my pointer seems to be on. I don't want it on. Darn it. Bear with me just a second. Can you change my screen?
Hold on just a second. No, we can't. Let's see.
Let me stop
Do
sharing.
the arrow buttons work for you right now?
No, none of it seems to want to go. There we go. Nope, it doesn't seem to want to move for me. Let me stop sharing and pull this back up again. Again, my apologies, everyone. Okay, I'll try screen sharing again and see if that helps. see, it lets me move. The pointer is still on. Oh gosh, I'm so sorry, everyone.
Okay, hold on just a second. Okay, what we can do is so we have a backup of your presentation. We can share your
Great.
slides.
That'd be
And
great.
yeah, so why don't you
Okay.
stop sharing?
Yep,
And
thank
then
you.
you'll just need to let us know when we need to advance your slides. So
Of
give us just a
course.
second.
Perfect.
Okay, so can you see your slides right now?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So just tell us when you need next slide and we'll go ahead and
Okay.
advance for you.
All right.
Okay.
Go ahead and let's get back to where we were.
Okay, do you need next slide?
Please, next slide.
Okay.
Next slide. Oops, back up one. Sorry. All right, before I tell you about the actual Good Neighbor Stormwater Park, let me take a moment to set the stage and tell you about some of the challenges we face. North Miami is a South Florida coastal community. It's located in Miami-Dade County. We're about 10 square miles in size and home to about 60,000 people who are primarily minority with a high percentage of poverty. And you can imagine how challenging it is to fund projects. We're really and truly a tale of two cities. We have coastal areas with higher property values and incomes, and a large inland areas with lower property values and income, which are primarily minority neighborhoods. As I'm sure most of you envision, next slide. South Florida is highly urbanized, and as with most communities, our city is almost at build out with very little vacant land remaining. But North Miami and South Florida as a whole wasn't always that way. Next slide. What you're seeing is a survey of South Florida in 1840. What is now North Miami was built upon a slough. When you overlay the repetitive flooding properties and the repetitive flooding mapping with this survey, it's totally understandable that these areas of the city flood and even minor rain events. The plus symbol that you see is the location of the Good Neighbor Stormwater Park, which happens to be in the deepest part of the slough. Resiliency and sustainability are our goals, not just in environmental concerns, but social issues, including, you get a message that you can't see the slides, someone can't see the slides, and including a high senior population and concerns with heat and access to transportation. Since COVID, we're seeing many of our businesses struggle, and of course, the city is facing a budget crunch, so funds are tight, as many communities can attest. Next slide. As you can see in this aerial, the site is in the midst of a residential neighborhood with homes on all sides. The site's still flooded, and portions of the ground remain spongy even in dry season, and I do mean spongy walking on it. Frankly, it provided little community benefit. We have one other RLS site purchased with HMGP funds. For many years, they have sat idle. The lot served as nothing more than a grassed area that retained some water through the natural drainage process. The city utilizes in residential areas, as you can see here, swales for stormwater conveyancing. Unfortunately, as you can see in this shot, residents and visitors park on them to the detriment of functional drainage. They compact the soil and they no longer serve their function. So there's often a lot of flooding, and even flooding, as I noted earlier, what they call sunny day flooding. So one of my goals as the city planner was to create additional green stormwater systems utilizing bioswales as part of the urban greening approach to development. Back in 2018, our department was contemplating how to increase our CRS points to better our flood insurance ratings for our community, and how we can merge flood mitigation and provision of public amenities and benefit as part of the urban greening. We thought the best approach would be to design the sites to provide flood mitigation, incorporate public art, install native vegetation, and create a beautiful passive gathering space with seating areas and walking trails to access the green. We also hope this could be replicated elsewhere in the city as funding became available. We had just completed that exercise when Miami-Dade County told us about Van Allen Institute's South Florida initiative. Next slide. So we reached out to them and submitted a project proposal to repurpose our RLS properties in their Keeping Current a Sea Level Rise Challenge for Greater Miami, which launched in April of 2019. Van Allen invited architects and designers from around the globe to submit proposals that reimagine and repurpose the city's flood-prone vacant lots. The innovative design of Department Design Office was selected. Since we wanted to replicate this elsewhere in the city, part of the project response included the creation of a citywide scalable master plan. Next slide. As noted earlier, our goals for the pilot project was to transform these empty flood-prone lots across the city into safe, usable spaces that actually bring community members together and to adapt to climate impacts over time, as well as reducing the cost of flood insurance for the residents. So we did have some high hopes, and some of those things we were afraid we wouldn't be able to achieve. As you saw earlier, the site is in a residential neighborhood, so we believed it critical to be a good neighbor and make sure we heard from the public, but particularly from surrounding neighbors as to how the site is used and what they would like to see there. Next slide. So we conducted surveys, door-to-door surveys, as well as surveys. We had people go door-to-door that spoke the language of the residents in that area, which is primarily Hispanic and Haitian Creole, and talk to them about what they would like to see there. It's clear that walking was high on the type of preferred activities. Therefore, we believed it was really logical to respond to the desire for walking trails and green space in this project. Frankly, making the space serve as a community park was absolutely critical since there are no parks in that area. Next slide. So we created space and activities to engage the neighbors through a variety of activities, both on site and at various venues. Next slide. Next slide. One of my favorite activities was speed dating with the designers. I loved this. This was so much fun. It's where the residents had an opportunity to share thoughts, ideas, and concerns with the design teams. These events provided great information, but more importantly, this helped to build trust. Because when you're working in minority neighborhoods who are typically fearful of engaging or typically they don't engage with the government or any planning activities, it was really, really important to us. We really wanted to get them excited about what was going to be happening in their neighborhood, and more importantly, creating a sense of ownership. Due to its success, we plan to replicate the same outreach methods we used for each subsequent project. Next slide. So as I said, they were able to chat with the designers. Next slide, please. And this is the typical, what you normally see hidden. This is hiding our stormwater activities, our utilities. So education, we believe, was very, very important. And one of the main goals of the project was to red pill, if you will, residents and users about the here and now of flooding. Usually it's what you see above ground is this, something along this line. But we wanted to make the invisible visible. Next slide. So the park accomplishes this through a bioswale that circumscribes, go backwards, please. It does whoops, there you go. Through a bioswale that circumscribes the site. Now, next slide, please. Making the invisible. Next slide. There's a bioswale that goes around the site. Next slide. The intent of the design, as I said, was to make the invisible visible. So you'll see that this big blue pipe that's normally stuck underground we wanted it visible. We wanted to utilize a low-tech, solar-driven, above-ground pumping system. And you can see that here, so that when the water rises to the top of that conveyance, that pump device that you see right here, it will automatically pump when this bioswale is full. It will automatically pump it up through the stormwater pipe down into the pond. Next slide, please. So what you'll see is we wanted this above ground infrastructure to not just be hidden drainage project, but rather that creates interaction with the users of the park itself. So you can see that we had a ribbon cutting ceremony. It was fantastic. Everybody had fun. That was on December 15th. We held that festival and block party. You can see the blue pipe on the lower right-hand corner. It actually became a seating area for kids. And it brought the neighbors together because, again, there was a mixture of Hispanic and Haitian Creole members of the community there, and not often did they come together, but they came together around food and music. Next slide. As noted earlier, part of the project was to resolve how we can duplicate these types of projects throughout the city on our other repetitive loss sites. So we looked at where some other opportunities are. And if you'll notice that the underlying here is overlaying that 1840 survey map. So you can still see the slough, but then you can also see the parcels. And the dark blue parcels we believed are the strongest areas for, because they are the deepest part of the slough, for doing more of these type of projects, because we believe that building multiple stormwater parks in the city would have compounding benefits and mitigate the adverse effects of sea level rise. One of the things that we discovered is the water table in the last 20 years in the city has risen 1.5 feet. So we had issues in South Florida. We don't so much, but South Florida has a real issue with septic tanks because many of the septic tanks no longer function because the groundwater has risen so high. So that results in lots and lots of flooding, king tide, sunny day flooding, just lots of flooding. So one of the things that we wanted to do is this plan would also bolster the city's, both its infrastructure, as well as hopefully our CRS ratings. So the parks score within multiple activity areas of FEMA's CRS system. And we believe that it has been able to give us some additional points in CRS. And as we build more and implement more of these, we get more points. And of course, the entire goal is to improve our rating system. Next slide. So expanding this network of open spaces, we believe that we wanted the parks to both increase the how do I say it, the absorbency, have more native trees and plants back in the urban areas and protect our groundwater. The third thing that we wanted to do was raise environmental awareness and promote community engagement. And the final thing about these stormwater parks we want to share with other jurisdictions and agencies is that it's really easy to do. These are very, very simple. It required being first out of the gate, and unfortunately first out of the gate oftentimes means that you are struggling and trying to get people to recognize the importance of this. The other thing I wanted to share with you is it's really important to have that education component and to deal with engineers in the public works who want to do a typical retention pond. Next slide, please. I'm almost finished here. As you can see, the plan has various types of network and lot typologies. Go ahead, next slide. So the funding sources, remember I told you we definitely have budget issues. So we had the primary grant. We got a grant from FDEP. Thank you again for that. Nature Conservancy donated a lot of our plants. We had private donations, and the county actually waived its planning review fee. Next slide. We really are excited to share this project with others. We've had other agencies and jurisdictions tour the park to learn how it works and the easy replicability and scalability of this type of community green infrastructure. And we did receive an APA award of excellency and sustainability. Next slide. I'm going to give you just a couple of takeaways. First out of the gate is innovative ideas are hard to move forward. It can be frustrating, but don't give up. Remember, I said education. Have not just a staff champion your projects, but also the decision maker. Get your city manager, council members. Do a really robust community engagement. Don't forget to bring in the external agencies and be creative with your funding sources. Let me just share just a couple of quick pictures I want to share with you. Next slide, please. This is some park. I want you to see some of the pictures. Next slide. These are pictures of the park itself and the various biomes. Next slide. It has coastal prairie. Next slide. This is the slough. We have the coastal prairie. You see the stormwater pipe. Next slide. Next slide. I do want to wrap this up real quick by telling you something that I wanted to share with you. 2 weeks after the park opened, we had one of the largest rain events that had happened here in South Florida. 4 inches of rain fell in an hour. The stormwater park was designed to hold 150,000 gallons, but because of its absorption and other issues, not only did it capture what it was designed for, but it also took on the rain from the flooding from the street, which it was not designed to do. So it has been very successful, and we're very excited. And thank you for allowing me the time to share. That's it for me.
Okay, thank you so much, Debbie, and thank you for everyone bearing with us on the technical side, especially our virtual audience as we were troubleshooting getting you the visuals for the slides. Haley Cox, are you on online? Oh, Haley?
Yes, I am.
Hi.
Sorry.
No, that's great. So why don't you go ahead and share your screen? They're going to work on getting visuals so everyone can see you in just a second here. Oh, hold on just a second. Are you able to share your? Oh, there we go.
Oh. Let's see.
We might need to switch to.
Let me switch the screen around.
Honestly, if people can see your notes, it's not the worst thing in the world.
All right. This is my battle station. I have like 3 monitors and I never know where we're going. So
Perfect. Okay, we can see your slides now.
excellent. All right. So hello, everyone. Thank you for having me today. I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person, but I'm Haley Cox. I'm Florida Sea Grants Coastal Resilience Coordinator. And I work with our extension agents, our specialists, and other staff to expand some of the work that's already being done to address climate risk in Florida. So my role is focused on developing and delivering extension programs and materials that highlight climate adaptation strategies for vulnerable areas of the state. And so today I'm going to be discussing how established living shorelines in Cedar Key have functioned as a a nature-based approach to reducing coastal hazards, particularly during Hurricane Idalia in 2023. So just to orient us here, if you've never visited Cedar Key, the city is located within Levy County in the Big Bend, or this Nature Coast region of the Florida Peninsula. And the island that the city of Cedar Key is on juts out about 3 to 4 miles into the Gulf of Mexico. So because of its location, this area experiences increasingly high exposure to impacts of climate change, including sea level rise and intensifying storm events. So according to NOAA tide gauges, Cedar Key is experiencing one of the highest rates of sea level rise acceleration in the country. Sea level in Cedar Key has risen about a foot in the last century, but over half of that rise has occurred just in the last 20 years. So extrapolation of these observed trends outpaces even the most extreme modeled predictions for future sea level rise. And coupled with changing rainfall patterns, this does leave a community really vulnerable to the effects of compound flooding, especially when rainfall events are coinciding with daily high tides. So you may have seen some of these images last year, some of the more dramatic ones. They are from Jim Cantori's live coverage of Hurricane Idalia in August of 23. The storm made landfall about 80 miles northwest of Cedar Key, and the Weather Channel crew was actually broadcasting from the Nature Coast Biological Station. So Jim was outside our balcony in this bottom photo, which I think everyone who's lived in Florida for a while can agree that's something you never want to happen. So this was not a direct hit by Idalia, but it was still enough to bring close to 7 feet of surge to Cedar Key. And then since Idalia, we've had 2 more hurricanes landfall in the Big Bend. We had Debbie in August of 2024 and Helene just at the end of September. And during Helene, Cedar Key experienced a surge of over 10 feet, and the community is very much still recovering from what was a really devastating impact. So this compound threat of sea level rise, coastal flooding, and then these storm impacts, it also contributes to the rapid shoreline retreat that we've observed in Cedar Key over the last 50 to 60 years. And this is an area called Daughtry Bayou. These aerial images document this really noticeable shift from sandy beaches with vegetated dunes to skinny shorelines that now abut road infrastructure and residential property. Because this erosion is a priority issue for the community, Daughtry Bayou has been the focus of a long-standing collaboration between residents, research faculty, and extension specialists at the University of Florida. And these projects that are labeled here in yellow have been implemented through a co-design process with the city and other local stakeholders. And the 2 that are in red here at the bottom, they indicate areas where additional intervention is planned or in progress. And shoreline management practices in Daughtry Bayou and elsewhere in Cedar Key now utilize nature-based solutions in the form of living shoreline construction. So I don't need to extol the benefits of living shorelines, but they do provide a variety of ecosystem services. And I'm going to be focusing on 2 of the benefits that have been the most impactful in Cedar Key. And the projects that I'll be referencing were designed with the goal of reducing incoming wave energy and erosion in order to protect existing infrastructure, such as major roadways. So all of these projects that I'll mention, they're essentially retrofit designs that were installed along shorelines that had some form of existing armoring. The funding sources for the Daughtry Bayou Living Shoreline projects include federal and state funds from the US EPA, FDEP, as well as FWC. So I'm going to move us through this section quickly so that we can really talk hurricane impacts, but I would be happy to provide additional resources that go into more detail about the design and construction of these projects. Joe Raines, which is pictured here, this is Cedar Key's first living shoreline project. It was completed in 2017. And unlike the next, Airport Road and G Street, this project involved dredging to restore pre-sedimentation hydrology to a canal that's still utilized by clam farmers. And this dredge spoil was spread before the shoreline was planted. And a groin structure that you can see in the bottom picture was created using huge sandbags called Titan tubes to kind of keep the canal open and allow for continuous tidal flushing. Since implementation, the previously failing bulkhead that is in front of the homes pictured here, it has remained intact throughout numerous storm impacts over the years, and the vegetation had plenty of time to establish. It hasn't been significantly impacted either. We have seen a bit of a shift in the community composition, though, as mangroves have started to naturally recruit along the shoreline. And this is Airport Road. It's Cedar Key's largest shoreline project to date. It's one of critical importance because the road behind the shoreline has been severely damaged in the past by previous storms, notably Hurricane Hermine in 2016. So the primary goal of this project was to ensure that the road was not going to continuously be undermined by erosion, and then hopefully it would be in better shape to withstand future storm events. And I am happy to report that the road did not sustain any damage during Idalia or Debbie, and only a very small section outside the project area was impacted during Helene. So in these pictures, you can see one of the unique features along Airport Road. That's these 16 artificial reef structures that were created using over 300 pallet-sized reef balls that were deployed by a barge. And these have been serving as breakwaters since they were installed in 2020. They provide substrate for oyster settling, and they also help attenuate wave energy. This is G Street. This is our smallest project. It definitely has a small footprint. There are plans in the works to expand this intervention through another project that we are working on. And these photos were taken facing the vegetated section of the shoreline at G Street. You can see during Idalia, we looked to be in pretty dire straits, and I think anyone that worked on this project breathed a sigh of relief when the water receded and you could still see some green left. So speaking of green, prior to Hurricane Idalia, the extent of the vegetation cover at the Airport Road and G Street shorelines had been increasing since implementation. However, coverage has decreased a bit after these repeated storm impacts, primarily in the higher elevation zones at Airport Road. So during all of the recent storm events, the dune and high marsh vegetation, which is it's mostly sea oats, salt marsh hay, and panic grass, as well as a few others, they've shown obvious signs of salt stress after prolonged inundation from the surge. You can see a lot of that yellowing and withering. They look pretty crispy. However, a few weeks after the storms, we do see this vegetation start to recover, especially the panic grass that's shown here outlined in yellow. We've been really happy with this species. This is a close-up after Helene of that bitter panicum with new leaves emerging, which is really nice to see. The Spartina patens has also been making a recovery along Airport Road. We did lose some of this vegetation. I think you can see in that top photo some exposed roots. But this is one area where we have supplemental planting planned. We actually have a group of students that's coming out tomorrow to help with that. But you can see a shift from the top to the bottom. We see more green start to emerge again. The Christmas berry in the background has come back. These are a few pictures of the high and low marsh plantings along G Street before and after Idalia. And the recovery after Helene does look pretty similar, although there is a small patch of Spartina alterniflora that was disturbed by rafted debris. It was actually a piece of someone's dock that broke off and kind of scoured the edge of the shoreline. So those plants are having a bit of a tougher time. So on to the good stuff, wave attenuation. So ahead of Hurricane Idalia, Mark Clark in the Soil, Water, and Ecosystem Sciences Department at UF was able to deploy 23 wave gauges along Airport Road and G Street. So the deployment sites also included areas outside the project zone, so we would have kind of a hardened reference point available to us. And in this picture, you kind of get a better idea of the placement here, and you can see what the exposed reef balls look like at low tide. So we have an inshore gauge and an offshore gauge that was placed outside of the influence of any of the breakwaters. This table shows the incident and shoreline wave climate and attenuation during conditions leading up to Hurricane Idalia as recorded by those offshore and inshore gauges. So during typical conditions, we see that wave energy reduction in the living shoreline zones, ranged from about 33 to 79%. Then this table shows values recorded during the storm, and the living shorelines reduced wave energy by up to 28% in certain areas along G Street. And there are a few other things to note that's not captured in this table, but the maximum wave height along the armored shoreline was 17% higher compared to what it was in the G Street living shoreline. And we also see some interesting data here with wave attenuation being expressed as the percentage reduction in incoming wave energy. This is measured across different water depths. So the black line represents the mean energy reduction values. The gray shading is the confidence of fit. And the color of the points represents the average significant wave period. So those warmer colors are longer wave periods. These are taller waves, the water's deeper. So the percent reduction in incoming wave energy does decrease at greater depths. Go figure. But something that's interesting, this is along Airport Road, we did notice that wave energy was still being reduced by up to 16%, even when the tops of those reef structures were under about 2.5 meters of water, which was surprising to see. Sediment transport. These graphs show sediment volume change over time at Airport Road and G Street. That vertical gray line indicates the timing of Idalia's landfall. And the losses of elevation due to sand export have been almost entirely driven by erosion in that high marsh zone, as well as the unplanted pocket beach and the dune areas. And those are elements that are not as common in living shoreline design. So examining only the lower intertidal zones, the volume change trends were positive or at least stable at all sites, indicating that erosion has been halted and accretion may even be occurring in some cases. I think this picture tells an interesting story and also highlights how these shorelines are protecting hardened infrastructure behind them, which is particularly vulnerable at the toe or the base of something like this concrete apron. This is that same section of G Street after Hurricane Helene. And we're still noticing the same phenomenon where the area outside the project footprint is still experiencing the effects of ongoing erosion. I just wanted to show this image again and point out some of the sediment accretion that we've seen around the reef balls in that lower intertidal zone on Airport Road. This has been a slow buildup over time. It's good to see. So overall, I think we've had great success building ties to the Cedar Key community. And these projects have really opened the door for discussions about nature-based solutions, even different types of nature-based solutions. We're working on some projects that are more focused on stormwater now. So great to see that. All of the shorelines have weathered multiple storms now with minimal losses of sediment and vegetation, and they have successfully sheltered the infrastructure behind them, which was the goal. So we came away with some of this data that suggests that these types of shoreline interventions do provide some level of protection during extreme events, in addition to typical conditions, which again, love to see that. So we also need to do our best to manage expectations. And, I can't claim that a living shoreline is going to stop storm surge or somehow prevent flooding during an event as extreme as Hurricane Helene. But, these projects were never designed to do that. So we're still in the process of reviewing some of the wave attenuation data from Hurricane Helene, but I can say that the attenuation values that I've seen so far are less, which is to be expected. It was a much more extreme event. And in addition to these more recent events, a few tropical storms that occurred immediately after planting did contribute to the loss of elevation and vegetation, especially in the high marsh along Airport Road. So it does make that establishment period a bit more difficult, and subsequently, projects can struggle after the fact. But another thing to note, if you are a living shoreline purist, you may not even consider these projects up to snuff, because they are going to struggle to adapt to sea level rise because of that coastal habitat squeeze, where they're installed directly in front of road infrastructure. They can't migrate inland. So, but this is really, I think the Cedar Key community too, they've been really on it as far as what they want out of these projects, and it is understood that this is kind of just buying time for them to make other adjustments that will be needed in the future. So I did want to give my contact information along with Dr. Savannah Berry. She was the PI on all of these projects. Also, the QR code at the bottom of this slide provides a link to a recently published journal article that contains this data and more information on all three of the shorelines that I mentioned today. So check it out.
Thank you, Haley.
Mhm.
And for those of you in the room, I actually printed out that paper, just a reference copy that is on the resource table if anyone wants to check it out.
Thank
So we're
you.
going to go to our last presentation of this session, and then we'll take a few questions. So the last presentation is being co-presented by Rick Hutton online and then Chris Keller in person here. So Rick, can you hear us right now?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
All
And-
right, very good.
Yep, we're gonna, yep, okay, we can see you, and then we just, you should be able to share your slides.
All righty. Okay.
We enjoy your sewage overflow area sign in the background, by the way.
Oh yeah, well, I still have some Halloween decorations there. Can you see? Are you able to see the slide deck? Oh, let me try something different. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Here we go. How about now?
Uh,
Oh, wait a minute. One more try.
Okay. Yep, okay, it looks like, yes, we can see your slides. And
Okay.
when Chris goes, he'll give you sort of verbal cues to move through slides when he's presenting.
Okay, very good.
Okay,
All right.
great, thanks.
Let me see here. All right. Okay, so you see my presentation. Okay, so I'm going to talk to you about our Sweetwater Wetlands Park, and I'm going to present half of it, and Chris is going to present some more of the details. I'm going to kind of give you a little bit of background of it. So our project is located in north central Florida in Alachua County, just south of Gainesville. And I'm going to zoom in a little closer to the project area. So I don't know if you all are familiar with Paynes Prairie Preserve State Park. It is 21,000 acre state park. It is essentially a wet prairie. It's located directly south of the city of Gainesville, and our project area is kind of primarily located in the sort of northern lobe of Paynes Prairie, more or less where the state park sort of meets the urban Gainesville area. So this aerial photo was taken prior to our project, and I want to give you a little bit of background. So Sweetwater Branch is a creek that flows through what is now urban Gainesville. A lot of that was developed, most of it was developed prior to the 1980s, so older development. In its natural state, it flowed out onto the prairie in more or less a sheet flow type pattern, which provided an important water source for the prairie. Again, in this sort of natural state, the prairie actually receives flow from a number of different sources. It is a wet prairie, but the hydrology can vary very significantly depending on the weather patterns. The prairie is connected to the Floridan aquifer via a sinkhole that is located at Alachua Sink. So Alachua Sink, there's a 4-acre lake there that overflows into a sinkhole, and depending on the levels in the Floridan aquifer and how much rainfall we're getting, sometimes the prairie can be very dry, which in this photo it looks pretty dry. Other times it can be almost a lake. So a number of things that have happened over the years compared to its natural state. And one is, and you can kind of see this in this photo, is that ranchers that used to own the land dug ditches throughout the prairie, and one of them was connected to Sweetwater Branch directly to Alachua Sink. And the purpose of that ditch was to drain the prairie to make it more suitable for cattle ranching. And you can see some other ditches, elsewhere located in the prairie. And one of the objectives of the Park Service, who manages the state park, is to try to eliminate as many of those ditches as they can. So another thing that happened since pre-development was City of Gainesville developed. And I mentioned earlier, this older urban area, most of it was developed before modern stormwater rules. So back in those days, the thing to do with your stormwater is put it in the nearest creek. And so although our public works department in the city has been pretty progressive in trying to retrofit wherever they can with stormwater basins, it's not possible to really do a lot of that in urban areas without having to knock down buildings. So so consequently, we still have a lot of stormwater flow that goes into the creek. With that, you get nutrients. You also get trash that comes from the street. And you also, the creek is pretty heavily incised. And so when there's high rain events, that tends to erode the creek, carries sediment. All that sediment was depositing out on the prairie along with trash. And then you had nutrients from stormwater flowing through the canal directly to Alachua Sink. Additionally, the Gainesville Regional Utilities, we operate a water reclamation facility that discharges directly into Sweetwater Branch. So, and although that plant has been upgraded and is in the process of getting upgraded again now, it was still a pretty substantial source of nutrients coming into Sweetwater Branch, with all those nutrients flowing into Alachua Sink. So, I kind of mentioned multiple issues. One is the nutrients, obviously, also the sediment depositing from stormwater and trash from stormwater. And then also the fact that, this area was being starved from its natural hydrology. So that's kind of gives you a little background. So in 2006, Alachua Sink, and here's a close-up of that 4-acre lake that I was talking about. It was listed by the state as an impaired water. And so some of the lingo I'll throw at you, there was a total maximum daily load, a TMDL, set for that water body, which basically in essence required all of the sources of nitrogen to be reduced. So it required point sources such as our Main Street plant to reduce nitrogen by 55%, also required 45% reduction in non-point sources. So pretty substantial reduction required. So we, through this process that the DEP runs, they call it the BMAP, Basin Management Action Plan process, we all looked at, hey, how do we meet the regulatory requirements that we have to meet, these reductions, and ultimately came up with a comprehensive solution, so that not only solves the problem for GRU and our water reclamation facility, but also solves it for stormwater that comes from, that is the responsibility of the city as well as the county and DOT and whatnot. And so here's what that solution looked like, and Chris is going to give you a little more detail on what it actually looks like, but this is kind of the concept. So the concept was that one is we would do some improvements at our Main Street water reclamation facility to reduce phosphorus. So even though the limits that were being imposed were nitrogen, we knew that phosphorus was going to be an issue too. So we were reducing phosphorus at that plant. And then we said, all right, let's construct this enhancement wetland right at the point where Sweetwater Branch flows onto the prairie. And the idea being is, hey, by putting our project right here, we are essentially capturing the nutrients that come from our Main Street plant, but also all the stormwater that comes in. And in addition, there was availability of putting some property here to build such a wetland. And so that project included putting in some facilities for removing sediment and trash, which Chris will go over, and then putting in these enhancement wetlands, which are designed primarily to remove nitrogen. The third component was we needed to restore that natural flow to the prairie. So we put in a distribution channel to kind of mimic, what existed before the canals. And then, of course, we backfilled the canals. And by doing that, essentially, we were able to take that water, reduce the nutrients, and sheet flow that water back out onto the prairie, which helped to restore hydrology of about 1,300 acres on that northern part of the prairie, in addition to helping with the overall water balance. And so I think I mentioned it. So we did we moved again upgrading the plant to get the phosphorus down to less than 0.3 milligrams per liter. The target for the wetland for removing nitrogen was actually 3 milligrams per liter, although we're doing a lot better than that, which is great. Ultimately, that water, as it flows out in that sheet flow area, it'll get down to background nutrient levels. So the cost was $28 million. Interestingly, when we looked at it individually, like if we were just going to try to solve this problem at GRU by upgrading our plant, it would have been on the order of $80 million or $100 million. And on the stormwater side, if they were to just try to put in basins to try to capture all their load, it would have been, well, would have not really been possible. So this really, doing this sort of comprehensive solution really saved the community a lot of money, in addition to really providing sort of a comprehensive approach. So I'll just sort of acknowledge this Basin Management Action Plan program that DEP runs, in association when a water body is impaired. They go through this BMAP process, they call it. We really brought together a whole bunch of stakeholders, including government agencies, citizen groups, environmental groups, community leaders and whatnot. And so it was a really big group. But the advantage of that is, although, you have these really big meetings with a lot of people in them, it really enabled us to kind of come up with a comprehensive approach and get buy-in from everybody and input from everybody. So I would say this is sort of a flagship of success of that program. And I mentioned the project was $28 million total cost. We did get some funding from a number of different partners, including DEP, St. John's Water Management District, DOT, Florida Wildlife Commission, and Alachua County. So they covered about $6 million of that $28 million in cost, which is really helpful. And this was constructed, during the recession, so it was not during like the modern times now. There's has been a lot of money available. At that time, it was really hard to get funding, and but despite that, we were able to get a fair amount. So I am going to transition over to Chris and let him talk a little bit more of the details. Chris?
Yep, I'm here. So this slide is really showing schematically the project.
Uh-oh, Chris, are you able? I don't hear you.
I can hear me. This
Hello?
project. Walt's not here, by the way. Don't.
Are you guys still able to hear me?
Yep. No use me talking.
Hi, Rick. We can hear you. Can somebody in the online audience besides Rick let us know if they can hear Chris? Chris, can you?
Testing.
Okay. Rick will probably have you mute your audio. Yes. Okay. So panelists can hear, so other folks can hear Chris. So Rick, go ahead and mute your audio and we'll have Chris talk.
All right, we'll try to fly this as these slides are changing here. One of the things Rick mentioned is that everything that comes to the project comes down Sweetwater Branch, which is that urbanized stream channel. And there are really three primary sources of water and water quality constituents that come with that water. One is from the Kelly Generating Station, which is a smaller power plant in downtown Gainesville. It has a small NPDES discharge into the stream that carries with it the residuals of some chemicals that are used to tackle scaling and other issues in the boilers and such in the power plant. So there's some level of pollution that comes with that water. There's the discharge from the Main Street Water Reclamation Facility that Rick already talked about, as well as the urban storm flow. And Rick mentioned also that the project was situated essentially at the mouth or the end of Sweetwater Branch, where all these flows are coming together. So it's an inline system that had to deal with highly variable flows, as well as this varying water quality over time. So one of the things that was looked at in the design of the enhancement cells is really, as he mentioned, the TMDL issue there, and really focusing on nitrogen removal, was getting the size of that system correct to achieve the nitrogen reduction goal, not just for GRU, which was the 55% reduction in point source loads, but also for the stormwater utility and their 45% share of the total load that needed to be reduced. So a lot of analysis was done on those three inflow streams, looking at how to best capture that water and what kind of capture efficiency we really needed to achieve those goals. So the average flows into the enhancement wetland cells are about 13 cubic feet per second. We take peak flows up to about 25 cubic feet per second. And then as I'll show you momentarily, there's some bypasses there to deal with the real flashy nature of the system. Through that whole analysis, though, the system's capturing about 97% of the available nitrogen load that's coming from the watershed, and then treating that and sending it out onto the prairie. Next slide.
Next slide.
Awesome, that worked. So the main focus being water quality improvement, we're really driven by that goal to reduce the total nitrogen coming out of the enhancement cells onto the prairie to less than 3 milligrams per liter. And when estimated, looking at the capacity of the Main Street facility at that time, which was 7.5 million gallons per day, that required a reduction of about 124,000 pounds of nitrogen per year. And you see just under 3,000 pounds of phosphorus removal there as well. The sediment loads, Rick mentioned that it's an urbanized channel. It's very incised. It scours a lot every time that it rains. So there's about 1,700 cubic yards of material. That's somewhere around, what, 1,000-ish dump trucks a year that gets deposited in the front end of the system that has to be managed. That was a really critical design consideration, as was the trash removal. We've seen everything come downstream, from beach balls to Gatorade bottles to propane tanks to shopping carts to a television and who knows what else. But everything that you can imagine as you drive around town in urban environments and you see cast on the side of the roads hits the stream and comes to the project. So that was a big concern. I mentioned earlier on the previous slide that the average daily flow into the system was about 13 cubic feet per second. That's in dry weather days, entirely driven by the discharge from the Main Street Water Reclamation Facility. But when it rains, it being a very urban, super developed system, those peak hourly flows shoot up over 4,000 cubic feet per second. And to make it even more fun for the floodplain people in the room, the project had to fit in a hydraulic profile that caused no upstream increase in stage. Next slide. So it wasn't just water quality and hydraulics that drove the design. There were lots of other things to consider. We were creating a big wetland project, but we still had to deal with permitting wetland impacts, which was fun. We had to really look at the number, size, and location of the wetland cells and how to fit those into the topography of the site and into the hydraulic profile. A drill drive to balance the cut and fill so that we didn't have to import material to create embankments or export material and dispose of that somewhere off site. That brings your construction costs down. We've heard about permitting all day. It was no less easy on this project than any other project. We got to do it at the local, state, and federal level. There was a big drive from the very beginning and a lot of community stakeholder involvement to really make this publicly accessible. So we'll talk about that in a moment. At the county level, we had to deal with heritage trees around the rim of the prairie. We had cultural resources to deal with, and everything had to be left in a condition that was relatively easy to operate and maintain by the city public works staff. Next slide. Major design elements at the top there, you can see where Sweetwater Branch comes in. The sediment basins and trash removal systems are there. Those are in scale about the size of a football field. The sediment basin fills up annually. There's infrastructure there to allow excavators to go in. There's a bypass that takes it offline. Excavators can go in, remove that material, landfill it, or use it somewhere else, depending on its chemical nature. The forebay there, the kind of the lake feature is sort of the belt and suspenders to the trash and sediment removal system. And it also helps distribute water to the rest of the project, which includes the 3 wetland cells outlined in orange, a forced sluice system that comes down through the middle of the leftmost and center cell as you're looking at the screen, a bypass channel that the forced sluice serves as a bypass channel, as does this kind of white area around the edge here, and everything ultimately connects back into that sheet flow distribution channel that spreads water out and sends it south across Paynes Prairie. And it is not a coincidence that this is located in Gainesville and maybe looks like a fairly famous logo. Next slide. So I mentioned public access. Everything in orange here on top is the top of bank surface that is there, and those are all their maintenance access, access for the rangers to get around, but they're also public use trails. So they're covered with crushed gravel. You can walk as little or as far as you want. The public use features are prioritized in cell 1, which is the one on the west, on the left-hand side there, so that it is a shorter trip for people coming off the parking lot and getting around. But if you're feeling ambitious, you can do the entire loop and walk several miles out there. There's also shaded viewing platforms and interpretive signage throughout the project site. Next slide. Time to really speed up. We'll go really quickly through these. This is Sweetwater Branch coming in. You see kind of that curve there where it was really channelized, and that's shortly out of the frame there is where it ties into the canal that was backfilled that Rick mentioned. Next slide. We'll just click through these quickly as you see the cells under construction. Next slide. Next slide. Things taking shape. Cell 3 is planted. Cell 2 is planted. Cell 1's about finished. The boardwalks are in. The islands are there. Next slide. Final project done about 6 years after. This is 6 years after completion of construction. Everything's grown in. You can see the different plant communities, and kind of all those white gravel surfaces there are the extent of the public use trails. Next slide. Nitrogen performance since the project started up. Blue lines are the inflow concentrations coming in. Those other lines there are the outflows from each of the 3 enhancement cells. You see they perform pretty similarly, and on average are well below. Actually, the average is about 1 milligram per liter. Rick said the target was 3, hitting about 1. Next slide. Not uncommon in wetland projects for a very nitrate dominated inflow, which is driven by the discharge from the Main Street Water Reclamation Facility. Nitrate really easily removed in natural treatment systems, particularly in wetlands. You see how the composition changes there. The total nitrogen's again less than 1 milligram per liter coming through the system. Next slide. Benefits. Cost effectively improve water quality and meets the TMDL. We're killing it on meeting the TMDL. Rick mentioned $28 million versus 80 million plus just to deal with the wastewater side of the issue. Removes trash and sediment, rehydrates the prairie, all these other public access amenities. Next slide. Somebody mentioned this earlier about their stormwater park being one of the birding hotspots. That is also true for Sweetwater. Over 250 bird species documented across more than 6,000 individual entries on eBird. At a time when Lake Okeechobee was having some particular issues around the fringe with snail kite nesting habitat, they all moved north and they ended up on Paynes Prairie and in the project. So for a time, we had over 100 nesting pairs of snail kites, and there are still some that are hanging around today. Next slide. Visitation numbers. You see the COVID boom there in 2020 when everybody was trying to get outside, but averaging better than 80,000 people a year. Next slide. And then just a small text slide on the O&M cost here. About $300,000 a year for the city to operate and maintain this. There are park rangers that are there dawn to dusk as the facility is open. They now have a little shuttle vehicle to go around and get people that have maybe overexerted themselves. There's a certain level of monitoring costs associated with water quality and flows and hydrology, and then some other ancillary activities with mowing, sediment removal, trash collection, and such. So I'll end it there since you told me to wrap up 2 minutes ago. And,
Okay, so
good.
all right. So thank you to all our speakers, and again, dealing with a little bit of the adversity of some technical issues, but we heard some wonderful case studies. We're going to allow time for, probably shorten it a little bit, but we'll allow time for a few questions. And then we will go to a coffee break and a break for our online audience as well. So first is, okay. So Bridget, I'm going to hand you this microphone and switch to the lectern. Okay, so let's start with our in-person audience and just see if there's any questions for any of our speakers. Okay, looks like Ray has a question.
This is a question for Eric. I'm just curious, how much money does Palm Beach County spend annually on what you would consider to be various kinds of resiliency projects, either on from a capital standpoint and or from an operating standpoint, including, of course, the Lake Worth Lagoon, but anything else that you would put under the umbrella of resiliency?
Oh, that's a tough question because every year is a little different.
And I realize that, and just curious, ballpark in recent years, what do you think the county spends annually?
And then the other thing is, so like that Tarpon Cove project that I shared, if we had to purchase all that sand, that would have probably been about a $22 million project. Because we were able to acquire most of the sand at no cost, that project there, we acquired $2.1 million in partnership with this, FWC that got 1 million from U.S. Fish and Wildlife, got another million from NOAA Hurricane Irma, and another 100,000 from the state of FWC's state wildlife grant. The state of Florida put in about 1.6 million, matched by 1.6. So a lot of our projects we try to cost share between state, federal, and local local dollars. We do have a manatee fund that puts in, I believe it's $500,000 every year towards restoration. We do have funding through voter registration, so money goes through there. And we do apply for the state of Florida through the legislative appropriations. And again, each year is a little different. So I really can't answer that. We're always trying to pinch pennies and match one project with another. So I apologize, I don't have the exact numbers, but it's a lot of partnerships, a lot of
Yeah, I get that. And in terms of the different funding sources, but anyway, thank you. I was just curious because I think part of the issue here on the west coast of Florida, southwest Florida, is seeing if local governments can begin to spend more themselves on some of these projects, notwithstanding the fact that finding matching funds is always part of what you do.
Yeah, so state of Florida and legislative appropriations have been, a good starting point for us. The vessel registration dollars has been, seed money, and the manatee dollars have been seed money, but those are all just small pieces that kind of merge everything together. And I think Jenna talked about it earlier, like between funding, between permits, community support, it's kind of like a perfect storm.
Okay, any other in-room questions? Okay, it looks like Bridget will have to scale the room. It looks like Tom Ankerson has a question. And again, I'm going to keep monitoring online, so if anybody has a question, feel free to drop it in the Q&A.
Yeah, this is for one of my colleagues there up in Gainesville. The Sweetwater Wetlands project is, if I remember right, and then the maps seem to bear it out, is within a state park. And a lot of course, what we're dealing with when we're dealing with nature-based solutions on the coast is state lands, sometimes aquatic preserves and so forth. What did you have to deal with to get that into it, not just state park, but a state preserve? And what was the challenge like for doing that? Thank you.
Hey, that was a big challenge, actually. As you mentioned, the Park Service is very protective for good reason about, not using state parklands for things other than state parks. What we did is, well, there is about 30 or 40 acres that was actually owned by the city, but we did do a land swap where we basically purchased, I can't remember how many acres it was, Chris might remember, but we purchased property that was on the edge of the park in another area and donated it to the state to replace the property that that the Sweetwater Wetlands is occupying. In addition, so we don't actually own outright fee simple the property that the Sweetwater Wetlands is on. It's still state land, but we have essentially an easement that lasts as long as the project lasts. So obviously, for some reason we were to abandon the project, then, which we don't intend on doing, but if that were to happen, the project would go back, the property would still be owned by the state. But that required some pretty high level approval to do that, and that was not something that they were quick to want to do. But on the other hand, there was just no other option for property to put the project on. And so, and since the state park was getting a really big benefit from the project and it was in their interest, I think that was part of the justification.
Okay, we probably have time for just one more question. But again, recall that we are going to try and really leverage the case studies here and do follow-up on a lot of these. So we do want to just, again, thank our presenters for bringing these case studies to us. Is there any final questions in the room? Okay, I'm just going to check and see if there's anything online. Oh, I'm sorry. Oh, Jenna. Go ahead.
Here, it's convenient. Eric, I had a follow-up question for you, and to your earlier point too about the cost, and I think you made an important point there that the availability of the material, right, was a major cost savings for the county. And over there's a lot more dredging of the federal channel there, which is how they've been able to, I think, make use of the material in Peanut Island. On the Gulf Coast, the Corps doesn't come in and dredge the channel and maintain it as often, primarily because there's not as much of a need on this coast as there is on the other coast. And also, I mean, they do the same kinds of condition surveys on a periodic basis, but we also don't have as many upland dredge material management sites developed like they do on the East Coast. So that does kind of put us at a slight disadvantage in terms of having that sediment material. So my question though, I just want to make that point as a follow on, but my question for you, Eric, is going back to the islands, were there any seagrasses? If you mentioned this before, I apologize, but were there seagrasses and how did you get around that and permitting that to develop those sites?
No, and that's one. So, I think that's why I talked about the conditions of the lagoon being so much. We're either looking for dredge holes that were deep, that don't have seagrasses, or in the central part of the lagoon where water quality isn't as good, or we've looked at shallow water mucky conditions. So we've typically tried to stay away from the good areas where we do have seagrasses, and we've focused a lot of our stuff in the central lagoon where the water quality is the most poor, and looking for like those muck sediments. So yes, that's kind of why I shared, the big dredge projects are challenging because you need a sand source. And, obviously we're always competing with development of trying to raise properties up. So if there are shallow water mucky conditions, that is an area to consider because then you need a lot less sediment to create the habitat.
Okay, so thanks so much again to Debbie, to Haley, to Eric, to Rick, and to Chris. I am going to transition us to our coffee break. I know everyone needs a good stretch. We're in that afternoon period. So we're going to convene right about 3:15 or shortly thereafter. So again, and that's to our virtual audience as well. So please join us again at 3:15 for our last session of the day.
Take care.